VR Connections Radio presents.
We are back. So Vegas Golden Knights Prospect Watch for 2024 is here. And this will be the not first, not second, but third edition that we have done here on Vegas Hockey Hub. And since we started this in 2022, before the season kicks off for your Vegas Golden Knights, we love to do what we call a prospect watch, where we break down the prospects entering the year for Vegas. And to do this kind of differently than some people do, I know that there's ranking lists. I understand there's people who love to go from 1 to 10, 1 to 20, 1 to 25. We're not going to do that here. And we're also not going to do a prospect pyramid because that's copyright infringement, and I don't believe in stealing that. So for the third year in a row, here for our prospect watch, we're going to put them into a category list. All right. So we're going to start out with a best prospect. This is your number one guy in the Vegas Golden Knights prospect watch. This is going to be someone who a lot of people say is going to be your best prospect entering the year. And then after that, we have category 2, which are future NHLers. All right. These are the guys that are going to be primed and are going to be eventually on the Vegas Golden Knights roster. It could be this year, could be next year, could be 2 seasons from now, but we see them as a NHLer and being in Vegas very soon. And then on the third category, we have players that have potential. All right, these are going to be the guys that have potential. They can make some progress, some progression, but they are not ready for the NHL yet. There is some steps and some building blocks that need to be taken in order for them to be there. And then the fourth and final category is what I call develop. All right. They need to develop. They need to make some huge steps in the right direction in order for them to make it to the NHL. Now, here on Vegas Hockey Hub's 2024 Prospect Watch, we have 11. Yes, that's correct. 11 players on our Prospect Watch, broken up into those 4 categories. And it's going to be a very good prospect watch. And if you want to kind of cross-reference this, we did our 2023 prospect watch entering the year last year, and 7 of those 11 spots from last year are changed. So we have some guys who were drafted in 2024. There are some players who have progressed from juniors or from the AHL last year that have made it onto the prospect watch for 2024. Now, here are some players who are not here from the previous prospect watch. Before we get into this new one, I do want to mention them because we have some guys who are notably missing. We had David Edstrom, who was on the list last year. He was their first round pick in 2023. And the reason why David Edstrom is not on here is because he got traded. The Vegas Golden Knights sent Edstrom to San Jose for Tomas Hertl, and then they traded him to Nashville for Askarov. So, yeah, very interesting 18 months for David Edstrom, but he is not on the Vegas Golden Knights prospect watch because he got dealt. Also, Yuri Patera is not going to be here because he signed with Vancouver. Now, you could get into semantics and be like, well, he was about 25 years old. What is a prospect? What is not a prospect? But over the last 3 seasons, our prospect list has kind of been a standard. We'll talk about what we list a prospect as in a little bit. But with Yuri Patera, we don't have to worry about him anymore because he is no longer a Vegas Golden Knight as he's with the Vancouver Canucks. Or is it Boston Bruins? Oh, wait, no, sorry. Vancouver Canucks. Yes, he's back on the Vancouver Canucks. And then Ivan Morozov, who is a second-round pick for the Vegas Golden Knights. He just signed a 2-year deal to go back to Russia. So he was on a loan to the KHL from Vegas. He was in Henderson for a little bit, but he is no longer a prospect because he is now back in the KHL for Ivan Morozov. So 2 other players that are not on this list from the previous one that graduated to the main roster, and I am happy for them. They are no longer a prospect. Pavel Dorofeyev and Kaden Korczak. Pavel Dorofeyev had an amazing season last year in his rookie campaign with the Vegas Golden Knights. And since he exceeded the 50-game mark in the NHL, he is deemed no longer a prospect. And Kaden Korczak, who has played parts of 3 seasons now in the NHL, since he has allotted a certain amount of seasons in the National Hockey League, I deem him no longer a prospect. So Kaden Korczak, unfortunately, will no longer be a part of the prospect watch for the Vegas Golden Knights because he is now a member of your Vegas Golden Knights. And then lastly, I do want to mention Jonas Raumbier because he has been there for so long and he has officially passed the age deadline. He has now aged himself out. So those are the players that are no longer on the prospect watch due to age, due to graduation, or due to being traded or let go. They are not going to be on your 2024 Vegas Golden Knights prospect watch. And to start out the prospect watch, we have to go with the best prospect, okay? We have to go with someone who is undisputedly right now your number one guy, and we're talking about Trevor Connolly. Now, Trevor Connolly drafted 19th overall in this past 2024 NHL entry draft, and he kind of slipped to the Vegas Golden Knights. As a matter of fact, Trevor Connolly, we know what happened off the ice, but on the ice, he is a skilled forward, someone who has good accuracy. He can shoot very well. His footwork is solid. But with Trevor Connolly, his 2 seasons that he had in the United States Hockey League was amazing. He averaged well over a point per game in the USHL last year for the Tri-City Storm. And more importantly, he is going to be playing college hockey now as he is going to be going over to Providence and will be starting out his NCAA hockey career after being in the United States Hockey League. Now, since he is the best prospect the Golden Knights have, their number one top guy, how long is it going to take for him to get to Vegas? Well, it depends on who you ask. If there's some people who think that Trevor Connolly could be here by 25, 26, there are some people who say that he's going to spend 1 year in college hockey, 1 year in the minors, and then he will make it to the Golden Knights roster by 26, 27. Now, what your host Ian Rachiele says is going to happen is most likely the realistic scenario. Trevor Connolly will be playing for Providence this year, well established. He's going to be playing college hockey. But what I'm going to assume is that they are going to do what a lot of teams have done with college hockey players, is that once the college hockey season is done, Trevor Connolly will then go over and play in Henderson for the final 5 or 6 games of the year. And then after those final 5 or 6 games of the year, he will then go into training camp next year and play the preseason for Vegas. And if he does well enough in Vegas in the preseason, he will then make the opening day roster. If he doesn't, then he will spend half the year in Henderson and then play half the year in Vegas. So 25-26 is the most realistic scenario for a talented player like Trevor Connolly. And with him being only 18 years old, Vegas is not going to rush him out there. But definitely by age 20, I do expect Trevor Connolly to be on the Vegas Golden Knights roster, and he is your best prospect the Vegas Golden Knights have. So that's category number 1, all right? Your top prospect, your best prospect, whatever you want to word it, Trevor Connolly is that guy. Now, for the second category, or as we call it, the future NHLer, all right? These are your guys that are going to be in the NHL, and they're going to play for the Golden Knights at some point. And we're going to start this out with the second guy that we have on our system, and that is Brendan Brisson. And him being a first-round pick in 2020, he has had an amazing transition from where he was a year prior. Now, back in our 2023 prospect watch, I did not have Brisson up in this tier. He was someone who had potential to be an NHLer, but I didn't think that he was going to be there yet. Now, fast forward to a very solid performance in Henderson last year and about a dozen games in the NHL for the Vegas Golden Knights. And you could sit here and say that Brendan Brisson, he is ready for the NHL. And considering the opening night status and what's going to happen there, Brendan Brisson, he could spend half the year in Henderson and spend half the year in Vegas, or this could finally be the season where he only plays like 10 or 15 games in Henderson, but plays well over 50 or 60 in the NHL. Moral of the story is do not be surprised if by next year's list, when the Vegas Golden Knights are doing their prospect watch, your number 2 guy, your future NHLer, and Brendan Brisson, he will not be on this list next year. All right, this is going to be the final season that you're going to see Brendan Brisson be on a prospect list for the Vegas Golden Knights. He is ready at 22 years old to be on the NHL roster. So, Brendan Brisson's going to start this out on the future NHLer tier. Next to him, the guy who was the best prospect on last year's prospect watch, and someone who did take a little bit of a regression last year in Henderson, and that is Lucas Cormier. And for Lucas Cormier, I still believe in his talent. He's still a very skilled defenseman. Unfortunately, last season, he did not show the progression he did in 22-23. However, I still look at him as someone who could be a third defensive pairing in the NHL. He could be a guy like a Ben Hutton or a Kaden Korczak now, who could be a healthy scratch and then put in the starting lineup when the Vegas Golden Knights inevitably deal with injuries. So Lucas Cormier, who made his debut in the NHL last year against the New York Islanders, expect Cormier to make more starts in the NHL this year. And depending on how many games he plays, I think by 25-26, Lucas Cormier will become an everyday NHLer for your Vegas Golden Knights. So this could be the last year we see Cormier on a prospect watch, but definitely by 25-26, he is going to be a graduate and is going to be at the NHL level. After him, your best goalie in the Vegas Golden Knights system, Carl Lindbaum, for a 21-year-old who was drafted back in 2021. For a 7th-round pick, he has progressed very well because this is a situation where when it comes to the future NHLer category, looking at what Carl Lindbaum has done is a matter of an interesting spectacle because he has been playing in Sweden for the last 4 seasons. And if you look at his record that he has done out there in Sweden, he has gradually gotten better as time has gone on. This is someone in Carl Lindbaum who, as anybody watched the World Juniors, by the way, you will know that Carl Lindbaum was in net for Team Sweden, and he was making amazing save after incredible performance out there in Team Sweden. There was a save that he did on Kreml that was spectacular when it came to Team Sweden. So, for a guy like Carl Lindbaum, he is the best goalie prospect in this system. The only question you have, and the question we have really, is when is he going to be at the NHL level? Because for a goaltending prospect, 21 years old, you do not want to rush him to the NHL. Goaltending is such a valuable commodity. You don't want to risk sending him up too soon. However, for Carl Lindbaum, he has been in Sweden for this entire time. Him coming over to North America is going to be expected. So, for a guy like Carl Lindbaum, when he does, eventually play in Henderson, when he plays an amount of games in the AHL, you have to ask yourself a very important question. And is that going to be 2 years from now? Is it going to be 3 years from now? He's going to be an NHLer. All right. He's going to be a Golden Knights goaltender eventually at some point. But we need to know how long is it going to take for him to get there. Some people have speculated 27, 28. And by the way, that's an almost solid 3 years down the road. but he is worth it. His performance in the World Juniors was a clear indicator of how well Carl Lindbaum can be. And then lastly, on the future NHLer tier, we have Matthew Chatterford. And Matthew Chatterford had an amazing performance last year in Halifax, out there in Quebec, out there in the QMJHL. And what's really fascinating about him is that when you see what he has done in this season, they've already played 4 games out there in Quebec with 24-25 season. And just look at that stat line very quickly. In just 4 games, he has 8 assists and 11 points already on the season. To think that he could double the amount of points and have 2 points per game in his final season playing out there in Quebec, it's going to be an interesting situation for a guy like Matthew Chatterford, and going to be a real interesting guy to watch, considering how he has progressed out there in Quebec. So he has had, like I said, 46 points in year 1, 75 points in year 2, and then had a 40-goal, 50 assist season out there in 23-24. He also did have a cup of coffee in the AHL last year, did play a few games at the end of the junior hockey season. He did get moved up there. Now, going over the future NHLer list one more time here on Vegas Hockey Hub, you have Brendan Bryson, someone who has definitely earned an NHL roster spot and someone who's going to be on the final year of his prospect watch list because he is ready for the NHL. He had a very stellar 23-24 in Henderson, having a near 20-goal season, and then he had about a dozen games last year in Vegas. Also on the future NHLer list, Lucas Cormier, a really solid defenseman, your best defenseman actually in their system, and someone who has played a good amount of games in Henderson. He did have 2 games in Vegas last year. Expect him to play more games in the NHL this upcoming year. You also have goaltender Carl Lindbaum, who is the best performing goaltender and the best goalie prospect your Vegas Golden Knights have. He has been out there in Sweden over the last couple of seasons, should be making his journey over to the AHL and playing for the Henderson Silver Knights. And then Matthew Chatterford, who had an incredible 3 years in Halifax, had a few games in Henderson, and has already had 11 points in 4 games in Quebec out there to begin the year. So we're 2 categories in. All right, we have our best prospect in Trevor Connolly, and then your future NHLers and Brendan Bryson, Lucas Cormier, Carl Lindbaum, and Matthew Chatterford. And now we have 3 players that are in our players that have potential category. All right, these are players that need to make some steps in the right direction. And for one exception, we have a guy who really could be a future guy in net for Vegas, but his Russia and KHL eligibility, that's going to have to come into play. But let's start out the players that have potential, and let's start this out with Jacob Brabirnik. And this guy out there in Quebec, he had 3 solid years out there, and despite leaving Charlottetown and going to Sherbrooke, he did play his first full season in Henderson this past year, and he actually did a solid job in year 1. Him being a middle 6 forward out there in Henderson, he had 6 goals and a little over a dozen points in 48 games this year. Now, he is going to be playing in the AHL full time this year. There's going to be no split situation. However, I do have to ask this question. So you're in year 2 of playing pro hockey. If he does be a top 6 forward in Henderson, which looking at the depth chart, there's a possibility of doing that this year. If you're Brabirnik, you're 20 years old, you were drafted in 2021. if he makes that elevation and he progresses like Brendan Bryson did this past year, could he crack that future NHLer category? Because I put him in the players that have potential because he is a good shooter. He can score. I like his dangles. And more importantly, this is someone who knows how to actually move the puck around very consistently. But we're going to need to see more of that goal scoring for him to go from players that have potential to a future NHLer. So for him playing his second full season in Henderson, entering 24-25, we'll be interested to see what happens with him. And then you have another player who is going to be in Henderson, and that is Mateus Sepafeyev. And him being in the Ontario Hockey League, him playing in Saginaw, he has steadily progressed. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that he has had an amazing progression or he has done what Matthew Cataford had done out there in Quebec, but he has steadily gotten better. 52 points, 56 points, and 62 points over the past 3 seasons. Now, he should be done with his junior hockey league, so he should go over to the AHL and be with the Henderson Silver Knights to begin the year. So, for Mateus, his players that have potential category just really depends on if he can continue to progress and show some improvement over this season in Henderson. How is he going to do in his first pro season out there in the AHL? Because if he does really well, then boom, you bump him up to future NHLer. But if he does a very steady season, if he does show some progression, but not enough, then you still have to put him in the players that have potential category. It all is based on how he performs in the AHL. And then lastly, the goaltender who they drafted with the pick that they traded and got from Logan Thompson, and that is Pavel Moisevich. And this is someone out there in the KHL this past season, out there in St. Petersburg. And even though the stats really don't show it, 3 wins, 2 losses, 2 ties, with a 94.2 save percentage, which is good for him. He was drafted in the 3rd round by Vegas and was a top 5 goalie prospect entering the 2024 draft. So for Pavel Moisevich, this is going to be a guy that just really depends on how long it's going to take for him to move over. So him being 19 years old, I really don't expect him to move over now or maybe even next year. But by 21, by 22, he should at least be in the AHL with Henderson and playing with the Golden Knights roster in training camp and in preseason. Because off of all the metrics and everything that we have seen from him, he has the size, he has the build, and if you're talking about big, lengthy goaltenders, Pavel Moisevich is definitely going to be that guy, and he is someone that I really look at as a future star if the Vegas Golden Knights play their cards right, and if he can come over from Russia and make it over to Vegas. So he is on that players that have potential category, along with Brabernik, with Sepafeyev, and with Moisevich. So those are your players that have potential category. And we'll go over that one more time here on Vegas Hockey Hub. As you can see there, Jacob Brabernik out there, 48 games and had 6 goals last year in Henderson, will be in year 2 of his career in the AHL. Mateus Sepafeyev, he is on round 2, drafted in 2022, should be making his first full-time season in the AHL in Henderson. And then you have Pavel Moisevich, who they drafted in the 2024 draft by Vegas. He was playing in the KHL last year, and it will take time for him to move over. And then the last category we have for your Vegas Golden Knights doing our prospect watch is the need to develop tier. And these are guys that have some skill set, all right? These are guys who are prospects in the system. However, they just need to show improvement entering the year. And the first one And this is someone who was actually a hidden gem for the Vegas Golden Knights, and that is Trent Swick. And him playing out there in the OHL for Kitchener, he is entering year 4 of him playing in the OHL. And considering his size, his near 6'7" frame out there in Kitchener, he had about a point per game last year and averaged almost a penalty minute per game. So he can be physical, he can shoot the puck, and he's actually been a playoff performer as well, accumulating 11 playoff points throughout his 3 seasons in Kitchener. Now, when it comes to need to develop, him being 20 years old and still being in the OHL, being in year 4 there, it's going to be a really interesting story to see when he does eventually make it to the professional, because when you are in year 4 of the OHL, you have still development, you have stuff that needs to be done, and with him dropping in the 6th round, there's not that much of job security, depending on if you're a first-round pick, second-round pick. There are more years they're going to give you opportunities, whereas if you're in year 6, round 6, round 7, I don't know how many years you're going to be given out there in professional hockey as a minor leaguer. So with him needing time to develop, I like his size. I like his physicality, the way he can shoot the puck. Just came off a 25-goal season out there in Kitchener. But it'll be interesting to see if he develops at all with Trent Swick. And then you have Christopher Seedoff. And this is an undrafted guy. And a really good story, by the way, for your Vegas Golden Knights. He attended development camp for the Calgary Flames after being undrafted. He doesn't get picked up by Calgary. He comes over to Vegas, and he has actually made himself into a very good AHL career at this point. And when it comes to Christopher Seedoff, this has been his career so far. Played out there in the WHL for not 1, not 2, but 3 seasons. Like I mentioned, went undrafted and then played his first full season out there in the AHL for your Vegas Golden Knights. Now, him being on the second defensive pairing out there in the AHL, and the fact that he is already 22 years old really tells you that he is going to have a limited window to him to move up and progress. However, we have seen his skill set. I like his feet. And when it comes to him being a team player, we have been seeing that on the ice out there in Henderson. So entering season 2 of being in the AHL, Christopher Seedoff, he is going to be on that list of guys who need to develop. He has the possibility of being an NHLer maybe someday, but it's going to take a lot of work. And then the last player on the need to develop category is Ben Hemmerling. And this is a center out there in the WHL, and he has had an amazing final year in the WHL out there in Everett, Washington. He not only averaged around assists per game, but he had a half a goal per game pace in his final season in the WHL. Now, for a guy like Ben Hemmerling, this is a 20-year-old. He was drafted a few years back. He's projected to be in Henderson in the AHL to begin the year. But what we really need to know from him is a situation where I look at it and go, okay, this is someone who, if he shows progression on the middle 6 out there in Henderson, he might get bumped up to players that have potential. But we're going to need to see that goal scoring he showed in Everett be translated over to the professional roster. And before anybody catches it, we got about a minute left here on the show, doing the prospect watch, we're going to do this one more time. The best prospect is their first round pick from 2024 in Trevor Connolly. He is going to be out there playing college hockey at Providence. He is not going to be over in the pro league, at least yet. You have category 2, future NHLer. You have Brendan Bryson, who should be off this list by next year. He is ready to be in the NHL, former first-round pick. Lucas Cormier, who was a best prospect a year prior. He had a little bit of regression in Henderson, but he should make more starts in the NHL this upcoming year. Carl Lindbaum, who is their best goalie prospect entering their system. He is someone who at 21 years old, out there at Team Sweden for World Juniors last year. He has amazing potential and should be in the NHL in a few years. Matthew Chatterford, who had an amazing final season in Halifax the previous year, had a cup of coffee in Henderson last year, and should play half the year in juniors, half the year in Henderson, based off projections. Players that have potential: Jacob Brabirnik, who is a 4th-round pick a few years back, playing in Henderson now. Mateus Sepaleyev, who is a 2nd-round pick, going to be in Henderson for this year. And then Pavel Moisevich from Russia out there in the KHL. And then players that need to develop: Trent Swick, he is out there in the OHL. Christopher Seedoff out there in Henderson. And then Ben Hemmerling, who is out there in Henderson. And that is your prospect watch for 2024. I'm your host, Ian Rachiele. And until next time, go Knights, go.